So everybody, a massive warm welcome to everybody that's joining us, but in particular those people who are joining us for the first time. If you don't already know, we host these calls on the first Tuesday of each calendar month. So they're a monthly call, each one taking its own theme discussion. And many of you are joining us, I know, for the first time, either as a new ambassador or as a supporter of 7030. So a humongous welcome to everybody who is joining us for the first time. As you all know, this particular discussion this evening is going to focus on the theme of adverse childhood experiences and the criminal justice system. So we are going to be exploring the relationship between early adversity. Oh, we've got a few people. Can I just very quickly remind everybody that it's so important that we stay muted if we're not talking, if we're not contributing to the discussion or asking a question, so that we can really avoid that background noise. That for those of you who don't know how to mute yourself, if you're on a computer or a laptop, it's the microphone icon. It's the microphone icon at the top of your screen. If it's green, you are not muted and can be heard. And if it's orange, you are muted and can't be heard. So I would ask that everybody, whilst you are not making a contribution or asking a question throughout the discussion, please do try to stay muted to minimise that interruptive sound in the background. If you're on a phone, it's slightly different for unmuting and muting. It's *6 to mute and *6 again to unmute. A few of you on a telephone this evening. That said, I would encourage everybody on this discussion, if you're comfortable in doing so, to make a contribution, to ask questions, to share ideas. That's what this is for. So I really do recommend, I do encourage everybody to do that. Of course, only if you're comfortable. You've got two ways of doing that. One is through speaking on the audio, and the other is through the chat box at the bottom of your screen. You'll see the word chat, and in there you can send either a public or a private message to share your thoughts on what we're discussing. So please do get involved. This call is being recorded, as we do with all calls. So if you would like to listen back to this call at a later date, or if you'd like to share this discussion with friends or family or colleagues who perhaps couldn't make it onto this evening's call, please do share away. We'll be sharing this recording on our YouTube channel. All you have to do is search 7030 campaign, and we've got a playlist in there for national live calls. So by the end of the week, this recording will be up there for you to share. The last thing I'm going to say before I introduce our guest speakers is that if you are making a contribution, if you are asking a question or making a comment, please do take the time to just introduce yourself. Say who you are, where you're based. If you're an ambassador, make that known, so that particularly for those people who are joining us for the first time, they're familiar with the person whose voice they're hearing. So do make sure to introduce yourself. And just like we did last month, we have a hashtag. So again, I would encourage you to participate beyond this hourly call. Take this conversation further, particularly where we get ideas, where we share learnings. Let's continue this discussion beyond this hour. Take it to Twitter, take it to Facebook, using our hashtag 7030TalksAces, and really involving as many people as possible in this discussion around ACEs and the criminal justice system. I'm hoping that our guest speakers are going to introduce themselves, so I'm going to do it very, very briefly. But we are being joined by a fantastic list of guest speakers, all of whom have been very kind enough to give their time this evening to join in this discussion, some for the second month in a row. So thank you so much to those people who are rejoining us. We've got James Docherty, a Development Officer and Peer Advisor at the Violence Reduction Unit, Melissa Rutherford, who's the Director of Rutherford Sheridan Solicitors in Glasgow, Iain Smith, a criminal lawyer at Keegan Smith in West Lothian, Isabel McHugh, Founder and Chair of Theatre Nemo, Melissa Berry, Head of Development Wales, Professor Nancy Loucks, Chief Executive of Families Outside, Tracy Donaldson, Citizen Theatre Project, Lisa Sherry, author, keynote speaker and trainer. And finally, we have Paula Harriott joining us, who's leading on prisoner involvement at the Prisoner Reform Trust. So a fantastic host of guest speakers. We've got a few people who are not yet muted. I'm going to just mute them myself. I'm not being rude, but there is a little bit of background noise. So again, just a reminder to stay muted if you're not speaking. The study of adverse childhood experiences and their negative repercussion on adult health outcomes is well documented. We now understand the strong relationship between early adversity in childhood and negative impact on a person's physical and mental health, that increased risk in negative outcomes. What we're now starting to learn and understand and recognise is that mounting adversity is also associated with an increased risk of violence, either as a victim or a perpetrator, and we now know in many instances both, and imprisonment. So as well as all these harmful health outcomes that we know to be related to adverse childhood experiences, we now understand that this is really a problem for the criminal justice system as well as being a public health problem. ACEs often result in a range of behaviours punishable by the law, and so what we can say with a great degree of certainty is that childhood adversity comes at a high social cost. The National Institute of Justice states that abuse or neglect in childhood raises the chances of juvenile arrest by 59%, and the Centre for Disease Control and Prevention states that abuse and neglect in childhood increases the likelihood of criminal behaviour in adulthood by 28% and violent crime by 30%. So I want to start this evening's discussion by opening up to comments, to thoughts on this statement from Jan Anderson at the Access to Industry, who says that the prison population is largely made up of people who have experienced a range of inequalities, barriers and problems in their own lives, which led to their interactions with the criminal justice system. Who would like to make a comment on that statement?
Sorry, would you mind saying it again?
Absolutely, yes. For those of you who are on a phone, you won't see this, but I'm now going to just share my screen so that you'll be able to read. Do tell me if you can't see that, but it should now be, you should now be able to see that, okay? Can everybody see the screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, I can see it.
Okay, great. So the prison population is largely made up of people who have experienced a range of inequalities, barriers and problems in their own lives, which led to their interactions with the criminal justice system. Who would like to start?
Hello.
Hello, hi Lisa.
Lisa Cherry here. Hi, how are you doing?
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Can you all hear me okay? Because I've not got a microphone in, so I'm just speaking into my laptop. Is that working?
Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. Okay, so I'm Lisa Cherry and I do deliver training and I'm an author of literature around adult experiences reflecting back on adversity, predominantly as looked after children. So the reason I was really interested in joining you this evening was because I've just finished doing a large piece of training around ACE awareness and trauma-informed practice with a section of the probation service, which has been really exciting, and trained around 800 people on understanding ACEs and looking at different ways of approaching behaviour in the moment, and really digesting this understanding that the people that the probation service are working with are the most vulnerable people in society, and have experienced such huge amounts of adversity, and that's been a really exciting piece of work. So I mean, I'm happy to answer any questions about that piece of work, I'm not sure how I could comment on what Jan Anderson has said, because that's absolutely correct. Without a doubt, prisons are incredibly traumatic environments, and the staff are really also working around that trauma all the time, and very much exposed to secondary trauma. And it's quite difficult to actually place some of the things that I would feel really passionately about in terms of being ACE aware and trauma informed into prison environments is actually a really big challenge.
Hello, Lisa, this is Daphne here. Just wanted to ask you.
Hi, Daphne.
Hello, hi there. Who delivered the training, and did the probation service pay for it?
Yes, so I delivered it, and yes, they paid for it.
I see. Right. Sorry.
Yeah. So I've been training for about 6 or 7 years around ACEs, and around trauma-informed approaches and attachment-aware approaches, and then ACE-aware approaches. And the probation service, doing this piece of work with criminal justice, was very new to me, because I'd previously delivered all my training with foster care, social care, education, adoption. So to go into criminal justice was something that I was very, very excited about, because I just felt that it has to be that way. And yeah. So
good. Where are you based? I should know perhaps, but I don't.
Well, I'm kind of a bit all over the place, really. So I train internationally, so around the country, but also in other countries as well. Pakistan, I've been doing some work in Pakistan, and I'm going over to Chicago in September. But I live in the hills in Gloucestershire.
Okay. Oh, well, nice to hear about all that. Yeah.
Thank you, Daphne. Thank you.
Hi all, Mel here.
Hi, Mel.
I work for one of my organisations, the Panacea Project Foundation, and we use trauma-informed self-recovery or self-help models, and that includes yoga, mindfulness, and positive psychology. And a lot of our work has been in both the male and the female criminal justice estate, and in community as well. So upon release, if women and men need additional support. And it's very interesting that, from our point of view, that actually in some of the cases, some of these women and men don't feel like they've been listened to, so they feel like they've been put in that position. So in the criminal justice system, based on what they've done wrong and being punished, and actually have been brought up not necessarily having a positive coping mechanisms to some of the challenges which they've experienced through their childhood, as an example. And we find a lot of the people that have been in there, they feel supported because someone will listen to them, not because they have to, but listening to them for understanding, so that we can look at how can we support their own unique recovery journey from their ACEs, and without being judged. And at the moment, there's far too many situations where actually even the prison service haven't possibly thought that some of these people in there have been affected by ACEs, and it's up to us as a community and us as a society to actually support and challenge the criminal justice system to look at people and approach it from an ACE-informed lens, as opposed to just looking at the people that are in the system have already done something wrong, so don't need help themselves.
Melissa, can I just come in there, because I think you're absolutely spot on, and one of the things that I'm really starting to get to grips with is this community response that you're just talking about, and really starting to understand that we're moving away from this. You know, ACEs has given us a fantastic language to think about individuals, but really we now need to move into where those individuals sit in what systems, and how do we inform those systems, and how do those systems take responsibility, and how do communities take responsibility, so that we're all working together. Because you'll know from what you said that resilience isn't something that sits inside a human being, it's something that's built based upon all of the things that go on around that person. So it's fantastic to hear you talking like that, because I think that's the way that we're going to move this forward, really.
Yeah.
All allowed
go
to
on.
contribute, or wait, I'm not sure on this. Hi, it's Sue Irwin here. I didn't know if I can come in at this point or do I wait?
Sue, go ahead, please.
Thank you. Yeah, this is the first time I've come to one of these groups. The work I've been doing is setting up something called Embrace, which stands for Emotionally and Brain Resilient to Adverse Childhood Experiences. And it's looking at how organisations change culture through an ACE lens. And so I'm working within an education, non-education setting. But as part of the works, you know, recently talking to a head teacher and recognising that, looking at those children that have actually been excluded from school and the process there, and also that was mentioned before about looked after children, the teachers talking, the head teachers talking and saying they can see the path that this child is going to take unless there is some form of intervention and it's dealt with early. So I think when we're all talking about different organisations, different communities working together, we have to really see that journey of that whole child, that whole person, and start to see all of the links. Because when somebody falls out of the education system, then normally, very often, they can then end up in the criminal system as well. So it's recognising what's needed earlier on to actually start, you know, prevention for that. But when you're talking about culture change, you're looking at various cultures within different organisations, within different communities. So it's all very complex in that respect. Hello.
Hi, Melissa. Oh,
Hello, Sue.
somebody want to come in?
I just stopped.
I just felt that I needed to say hello, Sue, because nobody spoke.
Could I maybe stop talking? Yeah, I mean, it's almost like you can see the path that's going to happen and you can understand everything that everybody's been saying. And I think it's so vital that these conversations do continue. But at what point do we all go through that paradigm shift and everybody literally on that same page? We're thinking the time it takes to do that as well.
Yeah, I think it's about taking people on a journey, isn't it, in that sense? So one of the things that I put into the training was very much helping people connect with that child, using a series of advertising materials so that people could connect with the child and start to think about what the difference is between the child crying in the cot needing attention and the adult slumped up against the wall with a needle. And it's helping people to make those kind of connections, I think.
No, I completely agree, because at the moment we're doing two things. Both of going through all those adverse childhood experiences and people who end up in the criminal system, dealing with that, but also at the same time, we definitely have to keep going with regard to education, and people understand it, that cycle. So it's something that we affect at the moment, I think.
Yeah, the other thing that's often missing, and there's a number of reasons for that, is lived experience. And if we don't have that voice of lived experience, and not just at different stages of lived experience, so where somebody is still in that situation, somebody who's skirted around that situation, and also people who've recovered from being in that situation, and seeking out those voices and making them central into how we deliver messages and how we talk about what we're doing, because and lived experience is also very lacking in research for all sorts of complex reasons, and I feel very passionately that that voice has to be present.
Lisa,
I completely agree. And through the work I've been doing, that is definitely a message that's coming out. But I think to support people to actually stand up and talk about their lived experiences or what they're going through, again, that's another culture we have to change. We already talked about judgment and how people judge, and so that's part of that support process for them to be able to do this. Can be undertaken. So.
It might be easier, I think, sometimes where there's a crossover of lived experience. So where, for example, you might have somebody who's experienced being looked after or recovery from mental health or those kind of things, then you're more likely to be able to communicate and talk with someone about lived experience in criminal justice. Whereas if you just focus on criminal justice, I think it's much more challenging.
I think that's where it's important to have that full journey. So I know we're having a conversation about where it's about the criminal justice system, but we need to support everybody within their thinking, almost building a jigsaw up so they see that it is that whole life process. You can't divorce the two.
So
Yeah.
how does that process look then in terms of enrolling, I suppose, engaging people with lived experience, and as you say, kind of at different stages of that? How does that process look in practice? How do you initially engage those people so that they feel safe, they feel trusted, and they feel able to share that experience?
Is that a question to me or
to anybody?
Yeah.
Hi, it's Linda Brown here from Glasgow. Glasgow Ambassador, Linda Brown. The biggest thing is the stigma for the children, because I'm a retired nursery nurse and I worked with a family where mum and dad were in prison. Gran and grandpa were looking after two children. They were 3 and 1.5. The children were traumatised and they weren't allowed to discuss it. The grandparents had to speak in hushed tones. The nursery didn't want anybody to talk about it. And the trauma that these children displayed was actually really distressing for the staff. What I think we should be doing is we should be getting rid of the stigma, get rid of the labels. And these young children have never committed a crime, but they're treated like the criminal. And a lot of the crimes that the parents have committed are actually usually drugs due to ACEs in their childhood. So what we would like to see is we would love to see the system to change the ideas. In Scotland, we've got the Support for Children Impacted Parental Imprisonment Scotland Bill. Mary Fee has amended this in 2015. We're now in stage 3 of the bill, which means that we will recognise the 30,000 children who are affected by imprisonment in Scotland. And that's the thing that shocked me, was the grandparents were not even acknowledged that they were caring for 2 children whose both parents were in prison for drug offences, and there was no acknowledgement and there was no assistance. So I think once we start acknowledging that it's not shameful and children should be able to discuss it, because the children are now 12 and 9 and they go to football, they go to dancing, their parents don't see any of the lovely things in their lives. They can't talk about it to their friends, they're frightened that their friends will ask them where their mum and dad are. So I think, to be honest, if we start when they're very, very young, to stop the stigma and to stop the embarrassment for children.
May I come in there? That's Nancy Loucks here from Families Outside. Obviously, we've been working in this area for a long time, and I absolutely agree, Linda, that's such an important point and something that's been really difficult to challenge, not just because of the stigma of offending and the assumption that, you know, all of these families in inverted commas are the same, but also the discomfort I think it causes when professionals, whether it's nursery workers, whether it's school, whether it's social work teams, whatever, that they feel in talking to people about imprisonment. We just finished a piece of work with the Greater Glasgow and Clyde NHS, where we were trying to find children and young people to talk to us about the experience of having a parent in the justice system, and going through professional agencies, going through social work teams and schools and so on, to try to find children willing to speak to us. But the problem was it was the professionals who weren't willing to ask the kids if they were willing to take part in the research because they were frightened of, as they said, frightened of re-traumatizing them or saying that wasn't their remit to ask. And when you talk about the 30,000 children, I mean that's an estimate, because we're not asking these questions. We're not asking who these kids are. We are in you know, by definition, stigmatizing these children by not speaking about it, burying it and pretending it's not happening. And it's deeply frustrating. And with Mary's bill in relation to impact assessments, she managed to get an amendment into the Criminal Justice Act 2016, but it's never been implemented because of the difficulties with information sharing. So still we have nobody asking these questions, nobody sharing that information, and children being told they're not supposed to talk about it, assuming they've been told at all. It's deeply frustrating, and you're absolutely right. It's absolutely central to addressing the issues, making sure that people actually talk about it and recognizing it's not something that's the fault of the children who are going through this. So sorry, that's my soapbox there. I managed to get on a roll, but I'll stop there and let other people come in.
Nancy,
No,
can I
just say
hello?
hi, it's Sue.
Oh, sorry, go on, Sue.
Can I just say
Can I invite Daphne to say something, and then Sue, please, and then I think Linda was going to say something as well after.
I was just going to ask you, Nancy, what age children you were seeking to interview?
We were looking for anybody, frankly, up to age 18.
Yeah, it surprises me.
Sorry?
It sort of surprises me that you weren't able to, you know, people weren't willing to ask people, young people especially, because I know in my experience of doing research, you know, once you got talking, they were so pleased to talk about it, actually, young people. I mean, I've interviewed young people who've been in prison too, and you know, the general experience is that I think people like to have a voice and they like someone to be listening to them, really. So it's a little bit misguided, I feel, of those people who are so, you know, supposedly protecting those people in a way. I don't know what you think about that, but.
Absolutely. I mean, that was the frustration, was, you know, the young people who did speak to us, who are often families that we were supporting, so that's the only way we could find them, were, you know, really found it to be a relief, kind of a catharsis to be able to speak about it and speak freely about it without being judged. But when we were applying we had access obviously through the university and through the NHS, but we often had to apply for separate kind of ethical clearance through the secure units, through schools, and people were either saying we're not going to ask them because it's re-traumatizing, or this isn't a priority for us. That was another one. Or the other one was, you know, we work with the person who's committed the offence, not with their kids, so that's not our problem, basically. And it was deeply frustrating. We only aimed to speak to 40, and we managed to talk to 14.
Right.
So that was over a year and a half, which is just preposterous. It was restricted to Glasgow, but it's, you know, it's very frustrating when we know that, you know, to improve resilience, we need to be able to encourage people to talk about their feelings and have someone they can trust. And we as professionals are taking that away from them.
Thank you.
Can I add something to that then? Because the work that I've been doing, I found exactly the same. It's normally the professionals that are worried about talking to young people about this and the concern. So again, having to go on that journey and see how they can build up their own confidence to do that. So a school I've been working with the last year, it's like a year later when they felt comfortable enough to talk to every child within the school. So they had a workshop, so 1,000 children received an hour workshop where they were introduced to ACEs, understood about the brain development, going into fight, flight or freeze, understanding about coping strategies, protective factors, and then what do we mean by resilience. And the children, the feedback was absolutely fantastic. And again, it highlights that it was more about the adults not feeling comfortable rather than asking the young people. And they knew then who they could go to and who they could actually speak to. So when you're thinking of 10% on average of 4 or more ACEs, the number of children, you know, that we can affect as well, they know who is there, who is listening to them, and who they can go and speak to. So this approach was more a universal model rather than a medical model. But the message there is the fact that it was about the adults that were worried about everything else, rather than actually the children seemed to cope with it. There was been no issues except for more self-referrals, but that's what they wanted as part of the outcome. So the child knew that they'd got that support there, which again is reiterating some of the key messages that have already come from this discussion tonight.
Hi, sorry. Yeah, sorry, Melissa. On you go. Hi.
I was just going to say, in relation to that, it's interesting to listen to what people are saying about a lot of the professionals and in terms of building relationships. And personally, from my view, this is where there is a place for that I guess, asset-based community development, and trying to put the community at the heart of some of this, because as Lisa Cherry mentioned about lived experiences, for lived experiences, you will find that in the community with people who trust young people and can get perhaps to the families and young people within that community. Sometimes the people who are best placed to actually reach out to some of these young people and adults who perhaps have had ACEs, are the community themselves. That just means that as a community, they need support, whether it's upskilling, training, mentoring, and supporting them. So actually, they can support themselves to overcome some of the challenges with both ACEs and the criminal justice service. Because if we start to get just professionals working in this, we're actually missing out on some of the key components and support mechanisms that anyone who has ACEs has, and that's the community themselves.
No, I completely agree, and I think that's where we do now need support for like media cover as well as, because obviously people in the network getting out to communities and doing a lot of work around that. But again, it's that support sort of from a more of a media focus on, you know, this is what ACEs are. The same way it took so long when, you know, smoking, they sat on the research for 50 years, didn't they? So it's, I think sometimes I get frustrated when it's like, yeah, I know that. So why?
Can I come in?
Why?
Sorry, I was just thinking. Sorry,
Yes,
there's a bit of a delay on here. Apologies. I was just thinking about that, what you're saying about community, and one of the things that really has happened in the last 8 years has been the erosion of community spaces. And I think that's really impactful in terms of that kind of, you know, non-professional engagement, just kind of hanging out with people, you know, and having those kind of informal conversations that I think is more what you're talking about. And I don't know if there's any way, certainly the screening of resilience has been really helpful in the sense that it's been it's been based in the community, so it offers an access for people to come and see it. But it's trying to find those sort of community spaces. I mean, because I go around the country, I've seen some places have no community provision at all, like nothing. It's all been taken away. And then other areas there are some things, and then in other areas it's completely reliant on, for example, churches and things. So it's a real mishmash of loss of those spaces to do things. I don't know what people think about that, or how that might be something we can sort of explore as well.
Hi Lisa, Linda Brown again.
If
we have trauma-informed communities, sometimes the people that are in the community know the community and they know that the parents are in prison, but the children of the prisoners don't want anybody to know, and they don't want to feel that they're exposed. And sometimes if they're in a very sort of small village type place, they can be ostracised, and also they won't have sleepovers because people say, well, you don't want to be mixing with them. The other thing is if we do identify the children when the prisoner is sentenced, then that way the organisations will then know if they've got children, and then they can then alert the nursery or the school, the community where they're living. I think that would help.
Yeah, I mean, I can absolutely see that that's just so challenging in that sense, and which is why if we have trauma-informed environments, if we have trauma-informed schools, if we have, you know, we might not be able to have those conversations with those children, but at least they're in a space where they're going to be getting their needs met.
I would quite like to...
Can I make a comment there?
Yeah, Sue, go ahead.
I think the last comment was so important because it links to the slide as well. It's that accumulation of ACEs and the amount of chronic stress as well. And so if we are advocating for trauma-informed organisation communities, then it almost doesn't matter which ACE a child has got if everybody is responding in that same way, and if the community is responding in that same way, then they'll be able to have that support. But it goes back to there is still that stigma attached to it, and that's where there's that shift in culture needed as well in communities too. So
yeah, that's absolutely my point. That's absolutely what I'm saying. And when I go into schools, for example, and I deliver training in schools, one of the things that comes up is that people say we don't have that here, you know, it's not a problem here. So, you know, it's been really good to have the Children's Commissioner looking at actually what a classroom is comprised of, and what kind of ACEs are in every classroom in every school around the country. And if we're going to commit to having trauma-informed schools, I tell them, then it's irrelevant, because it means that the school is in a position to deal with everybody, to support everybody when something happens, if something happens, and if something has already happened or happening.
No, I completely agree, but there is a concern from an education point of view when, you know, still people are pushing tolerance, behaviour policies. So there's a long way to go in that respect, but completely agree with you.
Yeah. Yeah, there is a long way to go.
Can I go back to the community and the role of the community? And I wondered if Isabel McHugh, if you're on the call, Isabel. No, perhaps not. She was due to join us. It might be that she can't. Isabel, are you on? No, it doesn't sound like it. Isabel was due to come on, and I'd kind of hoped that she might share with everybody what she's doing with Join the Dots and her programme around community engagement, to really give us an idea of what that looks like. So to kind of keep with that theme, and particularly looking at when we're thinking about how we ensure, or how we ensure that the system, the communities are built in such a way that reoffending, the likelihood of reoffending, is significantly decreased. So how do we create that community environment? There's obviously this kind of echoing message that the community has a huge role to play in this. And I would imagine when we look at reoffending, the community has an even greater role to play. Because of course that's the environment within which that person's then re-entering and expected to lead somewhat of a different life. So I wondered kind of what people thought the community could do, I suppose, in practice, what that might look like in terms of kind of making sure that it's a safe space for people.
If I can just come in there on that point, I guess a few things for that in terms of some of the work that we've done, which is a community-led ACEs Informed initiative, because we built our principles on the asset-based community development. So focusing on what's strong and not wrong with individuals and communities. And I think really targeting the strengths, even in some ways, what we say is turning ACEs into assets, because even those communities, and I've got intergenerational poverty, disadvantages, and ACEs, if you actually take time and look beneath that, a lot of them have got great resilience, want to change, but actually they've probably not been given the opportunity to do that. And from the work that I've done, I think it's really key to try and look at the strengths within the community and use that, whether it's places, people, as Lisa said, in terms of places, sometimes people don't think that there's a place to go. Ask the community, because the community, if they really want to change and have a cultural change, actually they will be able to find somewhere in that community for themselves where they feel that everyone can go to, and it's safe to speak about what ACEs is or what experiences they've had. And yes, they'll need support potentially from other services, but I think sometimes we underestimate actually the skills that our communities actually have to overcome the things like ACEs and to become trauma informed themselves. So sometimes perhaps they've not understood the impact because they've lived it and breathed it every day that they're having on not only themselves but potentially their future generations. But for me, it's certainly, let's not continually to look at ACEs as a negative. We need to try and look at what the positives are and use that as motivation and a mechanism to engage and change the experiences that people have had with ACEs.
I love that, Melissa.
I agree.
That's fantastic.
Can I speak?
Yeah.
Can I say something?
Yes, Judy, please do.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree 100% with Melissa, both on the thing about community spaces and about the vocabulary. So from my experience, 10, 15 years ago, working with the police, my role was to go into communities and help them to resolve low-level crime and antisocial behaviour from within the community. So a community-informed, a whole community approach has to start from within the community, one person by one person. So I would engage with one person and I would get them to engage with one other, who would get them to engage with one other. Often meetings would be in somebody's front room, and that's how it would grow. And also around the language, if I ever said to anybody, we're going to meet tonight and talk about antisocial behaviour, I would get a zero response. As soon as you change the language into something more positive and say, we're going to talk about the kind of socially acceptable behaviours you'd like to see in your community, you start to get a positive response. So in Warrington, in any work that we'll be doing, we won't be using words like trauma. We will be using words that focus, just like Melissa was saying, on what is strong and building on strengths. And if we're going to approach the state of the nation's mental health and all of that, then we have to look at prevention in parallel with tackling the situation as it is now.
Thank you, Judy. Anybody got anything else to say in terms of the role of the community before we slightly redirect the conversation?
Hi, Sarah. I think possibly I know a little bit about Isabel's plan for the Join the Dots centre in the community. I don't know if that would be helpful to shed a little light on that, because essentially that's really...
Yeah, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, my name's Melissa Rutherford. I'm a solicitor based in Glasgow, mostly involved with working with people in the criminal justice system, as well as parents and children in the care system of the children's referral system, which really is the majority of people that seem to be having trauma in their life that leads to them offending or being unable to care for their family. I've fallen into meeting Isabel through other links that I've had, Iain particularly, who's in this chat tonight, and Isabel has a vision to provide to the community in the centre of Glasgow, ironically just across from the Sheriff Court building, an outlet, a centre, a holistic centre that people in the community or being just released from prison can come to, and they can come for a chat, they can come to have some art classes, they can also engage in theatre groups, and within that, it's a room at the moment, within that room, that centre, the plan is to have different agencies there so that people can access the supports and have them there, and really they can start building their life and moving forward without having to fall back into the cycle of homelessness, meeting up with old connections, using drugs, or reverting back to alcohol. And Isabel's idea was to have people where the agencies that are required to get people on to the next step, to have a more stable life, so that they can then start building from there. So there would be the Simon community to access housing for people, so they're not homeless being released from prison, or they're not in hostels and temporary accommodation. Also DWP, so that people can apply for their benefits while sitting having a cup of tea in somewhere safe. Possibly solicitors, so that they could be helped with maybe having contact to their children, or if their children in the referral system, some assistance with that, or their legal rights for various other matters. Other agencies such as yoga for dealing with trauma and stress. That's all I can actually remember on the spot, but that you get the idea and the picture of really what Isabel is looking to build. And I think it's really, really important that we try and move forward to getting smaller groups like that in more local places, so that people can just walk around the corner or go one stop in a bus, rather than having to spend £3.20 in a bus ticket. They really don't have the money, so they'll just end up staying in their accommodation that they've just had and have a drink with the next person they've just met who's also out of prison. And I think it's really important to understand people's needs. I think I was saying earlier in the chat conversation that people being released from prison and essentially from other community-based disposals are really being set up to fail. They don't have the supports available, they don't have the tools that they need, and they haven't had perhaps the work done to make them understand how to live properly and deal with the issues that they have, and being able to start living a proper life without having to revert to the criminal justice system. I don't know if all of that made sense, but I hope it did.
Melissa, that's been absolutely wonderful, and I thank you so much for taking the time to explain, join the dots, because as I say, unfortunately, Isabel's obviously not managed to get on. I don't know if it's been the technology that's been a problem, but she certainly had hoped to come on and share that. So I thank you for doing that in her place. I just wonder, before we kind of hear from anybody else, Melissa, whether you might want to speak a little bit about your role as a solicitor and what that means in all of this, from the perspective of a solicitor. What do you see yourself learning from a professional perspective with all this information around ACEs and the relationship that it has to criminal behaviour?
Sure. I've always been interested in my clients as people, rather than just doing my job, keeping them out of prison, getting them shorter sentences, ticking them off a list, whatever. I've always been a people person, and I think that is probably what's led me down this route, to investigate more about the trauma that people have experienced. It's not new to anyone in the criminal justice system that people have experienced events in their life that lead them to alcohol and drugs, which lead them to offending. That is, the tick list that everyone knows about. But I think it's scratching the surface and going beyond that, and making sure that it's not just lip service that's being paid in court or by the sheriffs. It is really something else, something that is helping people and helping them change, and maybe having sheriffs that will intervene instead of giving a standard community sentence that they would have previously given. Perhaps something, they're thinking outside the box and giving something extraordinary. I've had a client that was, I think he was 15 when he first came to me, and he was on the streets in Glasgow city centre area brandishing weapons, and things escalated, and eventually he learned to trust me, and he disclosed things that happened in his life that he wouldn't disclose to social workers when the social work reports were getting done, that people didn't know about. And it was my duty to let the court know, let the sheriff know, and try and persuade a sheriff to give them a sentence that was going to help him rather than just a punishment, because clearly he's been getting that through school, you know, behaving punishment. That's not worked. It doesn't solve the problem. It's not a solution. And a certain sheriff eventually was persuaded by my argument, and instead of imposing a custodial sentence for a very serious crime, he gave my client a chance, and he gave him an opportunity to undertake work with the Venture Trust, which is a programme for young people, and they go on an outdoor course 3 days overnight, and they build campfires, and they build accommodation. They learn loads of skills that they absolutely would not have learned, and it really builds up their confidence and shows that they can do things, as well as engaging with counselling and trauma services. And that's just, I think, really, really important to switch the way that not only us as solicitors deal with our clients with all these complicated needs, but also the sheriffs, because ultimately it's our job to give a voice to our clients, to make sure that the people at the top making decisions aren't just, you know, listening to us and going, yeah, I heard that one before, and dishing out their sentences. We really need people to try and help change the lives of people. Prison isn't the answer for a lot of people. They do get access to courses and things like that, which can be helpful, but in other aspects you can do this work in the community. It's just about getting people to listen and getting the right engagement. And I think if you build up a relationship with your clients, you can investigate further, you can signpost them to agencies, you can offer assistance, and then ultimately try and make a difference in their life. And I think becoming aware of ACEs was through my own experience with my daughter. I put her in a nursery, and the nursery was an attachment-led nursery, which is Lullaby Lane, owned by one of the directors of Tigers, who is sponsoring the ACEs conference in September. So it's come through a very different angle to my work, and it is so important to my work that, you know, I feel like it was almost meant to be, and I really am excited about spreading the word amongst my colleagues and also everyone in the criminal justice system, sheriffs, social workers, anyone that will basically listen to me that I see on a daily basis, because it is so important to try and change people's attitudes.
Melissa, thank you so much. Iain, can I bring you in there? Because I know that you're coming at it from a similar angle.
Yes, yeah, I'm here. Just repeat, I think, what Melissa says. She's right on in terms of what she's doing. I think both of us are now speaking the language of trauma when we're in court. The judges aren't getting it. I did a little talk for the ACE Aware campaign, so I'm not going to repeat what I was saying about that, but there's a sort of relevant stories there. But as recently as yesterday, I had a 19-year-old young girl who was in on a breach of a community payback order, and that is really to do with her not complying because she was claiming to the social worker, a male social worker, that she'd been traumatized but didn't want to talk about it. That was then portrayed in court as she didn't want to engage, she wasn't prepared to countenance discussion with them. And it was obvious for me immediately that something terrible had happened to her, but not obvious to a social worker who you would hope would understand about trauma, but clearly didn't. That led me to saying to the judge, she really needs a new look at this, get a new social worker, maybe a female, maybe to try and help her. Now that wouldn't always be the case, and probably in 25 years, that's the second time I've asked for someone to change their social worker. Now this was not a case that she disliked him, he just didn't understand that she was struggling to say it. The judge said that this is not all about compassion. That's what he said, that was the words he used. And in my view, and I told him it was my view, it was all about compassion. And sometimes it is all about compassion. And that's the voice that Melissa and I are now giving in the court. It's alien to the judges, it's alien to the social workers, and it's alien to our colleagues. And we're just cracking along and doing it. Rather than just talking about doing it, we're actually just doing it in court. In a small way, it'll filter through. We're doing other things. Melissa's very involved in Join the Dots. I've written a little article with Suzanne Zudek in the journal, so that hopefully gets out there. James Docherty, I don't know if James is on the call. James is getting actively involved with lawyers and very high powered lawyers in terms of judges and people who make the rules and James and the VRU and the community justice team are really driving this forward. So in terms of community justice and criminal justice, there are things going on to basically get the message across, and that's happening now. Things that probably we all won't know about because there's things going on in the background, but there are things happening. But I think it's going to take a long time for the criminal justice system to change.
Can I just come in there as well, because I still here, because I mean I agree with everything that's being said, and I think one of the important things too, there's two aspects, is when we were talking earlier about people in the criminal justice and support for them, it's understanding their own reflective journey, and then part of that, but also as well, when we're talking about the judges and so on, is how do you weave that science in? How are we saying, well, we need to be understanding about the brain, we need to understand why people are actually doing this. So it's easy for them to say, well, it's not compassion, and well, you know, we're arguing about what's the word compassion mean, but actually, you know, we've got all of the research, and we've all seen all of the research, and we've also got the science there about the brain. So I think the power of all of this is really pushing that, because, and I know it will take time, and it does take time, and I know that, but I think the key aspect is the fact that, you know, there's a reason why people have behaved in that particular way, and, you know, it's not saying, well, it's okay to do that, but if they are responding in a particular way, that's why we've got to look at preventative measures as well. So I definitely believe that all of the time it's pushing the science and the reasons for particular behaviour at the same time is important.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And you know, it's making that point, you know, that when, you know, I'm not making this up. I often find myself saying, I'm not making this up, you know. It sits on top of a massive body of extensive research, and I think you're absolutely right. That has to be a key part of the message whenever having these conversations.
Yeah, definitely. And I think if we all continue to do that, at some point there will be that shift in thinking. Because I know when I first spoke to a couple of colleagues in the States and said, well, how do I deal with the cynics? And again, you know, their message a few years ago was, well, we've got the evidence now, the scientific evidence. And I mean, my background is science as well. So, you can look at things from a completely different perspective when you do take the science and think, you know, I'm not making this up, just because, you know, I might be more compassionate than somebody else, but the compassion helps. However, we have to understand the science and have to understand how we work with people who have experienced chronic stress, traumaed life, and this is the way that they're now behaving. And I think it's wrong if judges don't sit up and listen. I think it's wrong if politicians don't sit up and listen, and other people don't sit up and listen. And at some point there will be that, you know, are you arguing with the science now then? So, sorry, I'll get off my soapbox now on that one.
No, I'm with you there, Sue.
Anybody else?
Could I say something?
Yes, please do. Hi, Jane.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Hi, Jane.
Hi, this is Jane. I think we need to bring the science to the people who are affected by ACEs. So we need to bring the science of ACEs to people in prisons through psychoeducation and through various body-based interventions, because I think a lot of the programs that are being offered are not strengths-based. They're not relevant to people. They are very much following this risk needs responsivity model, which is about cognitive behavioral therapy. It doesn't work if people's prefrontal cortex is offline due to fear and you know, the flight response or fight response. And I think if people can be assisted in understanding themselves better and developing self-compassion, whatever about compassion from the community, but if they can understand themselves and actually kind of understand their addictions as being coping strategies that helped them numb the pain of what they'd been through. And then if they're given tools as to how to deal with daily stressors and big stressors that they're going to face, you know, in prison and when they get out, I think they've much better chance of actually not going to the dealer on the corner looking for a bag full of benzos at the first problem that they encounter on the outside, of which there will be many. So I really think people find the brain fascinating. You don't need to make it super complicated, but to tell people how it grows from the bottom up, what emotional regulation is, why toxic stress affects people as it does. In a way, it takes some of the personal blame and shame away, and I think that's very important in terms of healing and also trying to imagine a positive future self.
Oh, we've got some terrible noise happening. Martha, did you want to say something? No, I think Martha. Oh, Martha, I think your laptop is making an awful sound. So perhaps make it a chat box, Martha. It's not working this evening. I'm not sure why. But do add your comment to the chat box, and I'll make sure to share that with everybody through the email tomorrow. As we have come to the end of the call, and that we've gone over 8 o'clock now, so I don't want us to take up too much more time. I want to finish.
Sorry, Alex, I wonder if I might be able to speak very quickly.
Very quickly, Alex, please.
Okay, I just wanted to give everyone an update of where we are politically. At the close of play today, we stand at the public support of 129 members of Parliament. I had this dream that I could come onto this call and say that we had 130, because obviously that would equal 20% of Parliament. And unfortunately, we're missing by one. But, you know, effectively one more MP, and we have a fifth of the Houses of Parliament, the whole political spectrum, who said, yes, we are 70-30 fans and we do want to see change. And there are two really encouraging things out of that. First of all, one of those MPs is an individual who originally said, when we went to a year and a half ago, said, I'm not interested, I don't want to get involved. We on the back of the political support, we're back to that individual, and he said, okay, yes, I'm convinced. The weight of political endorsement we have has convinced me that this campaign is worth getting involved in. So minds can be changed. And secondly, I've begun, obviously, with the weight of political support we have, I began speaking to undersecretaries and ministers of state. So these are people within the government. And originally, when Wave went to these people 2-3 years ago, they would say, we're in the government, we can't do anything. These people who then hold these positions now are actually saying, okay, this is definitely food for thought. They may not come back and say we're fans, but at least now we're not being dismissed. So we're not being told no, we're being told, okay, we'll have a look at it and come back to you. So we are beginning to make those small inroads into beginning to influence people that do have the power to change things.
Absolutely, Alex. Thank you for sharing that and ending us on such a positive note, because it's really important to remember what we have already achieved and that things are really changing. And there's this wonderful momentum and this wave that we're all riding. So we must keep going with that. I'm going to finish the call by allowing one of our Glasgow ambassadors to share this letter. I think Martha maybe had hoped to read it out, but unfortunately the audio is not working in our favour. So I'm going to hand it over to Linda in Glasgow, who's going to read out this letter written by a child whose parents are in prison and who uses this, I believe it's a poem, to express the impact that that's had on them. So we'll finish the call with that. And I'd just like to remind everybody that the next call will be Tuesday, the 4th of September, the first Tuesday of September, and this one's going to be on creating trauma-informed NHS health services. So looking at all health services and how do we make sure that we are making sure they are trauma-informed. Linda, would you like to finish the call?
Yeah, this was a poem which was shared by Families Outside, and it's from Children Heard and Seen. which I urge you to follow Families Outside and Children Heard and Seen on Twitter. And the poem is called Forget. Dad is inside for murder, but I'm not quite sure what to think. Should I believe he is guilty or not? How could I think so low of him? I feel disappointed and sad. I won't see him for a very long time. He could be a murderer, but Dad is still my dad. I sometimes feel so alone and wish for one of his kind-hearted hugs, but I know it won't happen for a very, very long time. So I ignore the feeling and postpone. I ignore the fact that me and Dad don't play footy every Sunday and he never picks me up from school. But that's the way my life is now. So I have to move on and forget. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, Linda. Thank you, everybody who joined us for this evening's call. As usual, we did not have time to cover everything that I'd hoped we'd cover, but plenty to think about, lots of food for thought. And as we said at the beginning of the discussion, we have our hashtag 7030TalksAces. Please do use social media in the way that it's used best, which is to share this information, continue discussions. Twitter is a fantastic space to share this stuff. So take what we've discussed today and really grow that conversation to a wider audience via social media. Again, just to remind, next call Tuesday, the 4th of September on NHS Health Services being trauma informed. And again, we'll have a host of guest speakers joining us for that. So I hope all of you can join us. And if there's anybody on the call who's not yet a 7030 ambassador, but has now listened to this discussion and thinks, I must be a part of this movement, please do get in touch with me and email info@7030.org.uk or direct message us on Twitter and find out how you can get involved in your local community. Thank you, everybody, and good evening. Good night.
Good night.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Good night, Sarah. Sarah.